What happened to King Viserys' face? What illness did he have? It's mad to think that our ancestors lived in a world where something that is easily treatable today used to be fatal. Can you imagine dying from a cut you didn't treat for too long? And yet, the mighty Khal Drogo passed away from a wound that would be light work for a skilled doctor. Fever isn't something that scares any of us today, but Westeros has known at least half a dozen seasonal fevers and sicknesses that have taken the lives of countless lords and small folk alike. Point is, in the medieval era, it wasn't war that took lives so much as it was the sickness. And so, King Viserys Targaryen falling sick should be a commonplace thing for the world that he was living in, right? Well, yes and no. For his sickness itself contributes towards his perception as king. And if episode 8 is anything to go by, Viserys' reign was rotting from within. But what happened to his face? What illness caused him to become this weak? And is it an indication of something larger? Well, we'll answer all that and more in this video. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Was Viserys this sick in Fire and Blood? The fact that there was something wrong with Viserys health-wise was intimated to us pretty early on in House of the Dragon. The first time we see the king in an intimate setting is when Grand Maester Mellos is treating a wound Viserys received on his back while sitting on the Iron Throne. Mellos observes that the flesh is not healing quite as quickly as it should be, and from that point onward, it's been a downhill journey for possibly the most good-natured Targaryen king of all time. But in the books, the story is quite different. For the only thing King Viserys was seemingly suffering from was a severe case of gluttony. Though the histories remember his grace in a kinder light in honor of the peace he gave the Seven Kingdoms, there is no two ways about it. Viserys was most likely bordering on obese. The king was said to indulge himself well at feasts and dinners, and is often described as being a plump man who grew stout in his final years. Viserys was said to have weighed so much that he developed gout, and spent the last few years of his reign holding court in his solar rather than the throne room. Those years also coincided with him losing his fingers, something that happens in the TV show as well, though the context surrounding this amputation are far different from one another. In Fire and Blood, King Viserys slipped on his throne and cut his hand to the bone when he issued the command to turn the Velaryon claimants to Driftmark into the Silent Five. By the time Vaemond Velaryon made his plea in the show, Viserys was already grasping at his death throes. So what makes the original version of his death so different? Well, that would be the fact that in the former, there was nothing that was suggesting that King Viserys was dealing with a major health issue, save for his weight. And if you put on your detective's hat and go through the pages that speak of the final years of his reign, it becomes clearer that the king most likely died due to heart-related issues. When Viserys cut himself to the bone and caught a bad fever of an infection, it was believed that he would pass away. His Grand Maester could do nothing for him, and it was Rhaenyra's Maester Gerardis who saved the king's life by immediately amputating the 2 fingers from his left hand. Though it is true that he never truly recovered from this ordeal, he did feel good enough to throw a feast in honor of his own recovery. And in his final days, he would complain about a very specific kind of pain, that being pain in his chest. King Viserys would often complain of feeling a tightness in his chest that would leave him with excruciating bouts of pain, but none could help soothe the king's troubles. He did not die like a rotting corpse in the books, but had probably the best death any king could ask for, still lucid in his own bed during a nap. So if you put together all these pieces, then the picture that emerges is something only modern medicine holds an answer to, and that is that Viserys most likely suffered from a heart condition. It would make sense given his habit of indulgence and the observation that his later years were marked by acute chest pain, directly where the heart is supposed to be. The fact that George R.R. Martin had him pass away in his sleep is about as tropey a death as he has given to any of his characters, because people dying unexpectedly of a heart attack only to bring a simmer conflict to the boil is something that has been done time and again in mainstream storytelling. But on the other hand, it could also be a slow-acting poison, because the swiftness with which Queen Alicent grabbed power in the wake of his death is certainly eyebrow-raising. Archmaester Gildane notes that the queen was informed of the king's death as soon as it happened, and she subsequently had everyone who witnessed it locked up in the dungeons. We just spent a good few minutes arguing that his death might have been natural, but we can counter that by quoting Westerosi thought processes to you. Poison is a woman's weapon. And there is a woman involved in the equation, as you can now see. The fact that Alicent placed her people seemingly expecting Viserys' death is already suspect. What makes it more suspicious is that the king was known to love hippocras, a type of wine that is made with spices and sweetened with sugar, and that there is a poison that would perfectly blend into such a drink. There are many potions that the Westerosi nobles used to stimulate sleep. The essence of nightshade is known to help calm a person's nerves with a drop and provide deep, dreamless sleep with 3. Sweet sleep, as its name suggests, is a sweet liquid that induces sleep when taken in the right dosage. You might notice a pattern emerge here with doses, and that's because nightshade and sweet sleep are both actually poisons, and the maesters use it as stimulants by microdosing their lords and ladies. The latter is of a special note here because sweet sleep's taste would blend into a cup of hippocras perfectly, and the king was known to take one before every nap. You can see where we are going with this. And indeed, a poisoning was suspected for a brief time when Viserys passed away. But Fire and Blood leaves even this, as many other things, ambiguous. This is also probably why the man himself has called Paddy Considine's Viserys as superior to his, citing the House of the Dragon character's tragic majesty, a take that he wished he had come up with. So what exactly is this ailment that turned his character into such a favorite of its own creator? Well,
we should leech it again, Megan.
It's a wound that refuses to heal, Grandmaster.
King Viserys Targaryen suffers from a form of leprosy. Paddy Considine revealed that the reason that Viserys' health never seems to recuperate from the moment we find out about its decline is because he suffers from a form of leprosy. Also known as Hansen's disease, leprosy is something that has afflicted humanity for thousands of years. To put it in simple terms, a person who contracts this disease faces significant damage to the nerves, the skin, heck, even their eyesight. It eats away at a person's immune system, starting off as a cold that seems worse than usual, and then it only gets worse from there. The most common mark of leprosy is the patches of red skin that develop all over your flesh. They also indicate the type of leprosy you're suffering from. A person carrying this disease today can be reliably cured given proper treatment, and leprosy is not generally considered to be a threatening disease, as it takes literally years in some cases to even take root. But in the time frame that House of the Dragon was set in, there was no cure for this disease, and Viserys was a marked man as soon as he began showing symptoms of the same. The first of these was the fact that his back wound was simply not healing in the first episode, but then he cut his hand on the throne when dismissing Daemon, and things never quite recovered from there. First came the fingers, which looked like 2 sticks of black pudding when Melos was trying to treat them with maggots. But even after they had been chopped off, Viserys' health did not recuperate because by then it was too late. The king began to carry a handkerchief more often than not, being seen with a severe cold even in the hot blaze of the summer. His hand, though bereft of the fingers that was seemingly the cause of his ailment, was in more pain than ever. A mere touch from Princess Rhaenys was even to make the king flinch in pain. His back had at least 3 red patches on it when we saw him performing his kingly duties with Alicent one night, and after returning from Driftmark and sealing Rhaenyra's betrothal, you could see those painful lesions associated with leprosy sprouting all across his arm like something worse than grayscale. By the time the 10-year skip occurred, Viserys was limping like he was 80, when in reality he could have been no older than 50. And 6 years after episode 7, Viserys is looking more like the three-eyed raven than the young king, as men used to call him in his youth. He is limping so badly that even a cane cannot keep him propped up. He is usually carried around wherever he needs to go, and more often than not is out like a light, thanks to the milk of the poppy. The king lost his hair, his left arm, several of his teeth, part of his right cheek, and his entire right eye to the disease by the time Rhaenyra and Daemon returned to King's Landing to secure the former's position as heir and introduce him to his grandsons Aegon and Viserys. All of these things are consistent with what we know about leprosy if it is left untreated in a person, and it is ultimately the pain of the disease and the delirium of the poppy that causes the king to die a sad death and leave his wife with a confusion that made the 7 kingdoms bleed. In Fire and Blood, Viserys' death seemed sudden to the point it feels premeditated. But there could have been no doubt in a person's mind that the king was dying in House of the Dragon. Otto Hightower said as much to Alicent years before Viserys actually passed away. The show has used his disease to show us just how rotten his reign was getting from the inside, no matter what the perception of it was outside the walls of the Red Keep. It was first his inaction, then his actions, and then his failure to commit to one thing entirely that proved his own undoing. Viserys cutting himself upon the Iron Throne was proof enough that he was an unworthy king, but his diseases holds greater significance once you realize what it means for Targaryens themselves.
You're weak, Viserys.
Viserys was not just a weak king, but also a weak Targaryen with no blood of the dragon. Before we were introduced to Daenerys Targaryen, Mother of Dragons, Breaker of Chains, Queen of Meereen, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, and a dozen other titles, Westeros had only known one other Daenerys of House Targaryen. Her story is both ominous and tragic. It is said that while Aegon the Conqueror might have brought the Seven Kingdoms together, it was Jaehaerys the Conciliator who truly made it a united realm. At the heart of Jaehaerys' many political and military accomplishments was the doctrine of exceptionalism, which killed many of the sparrows that the Iron Throne had faced with one stroke. The doctrine can essentially be boiled down to 2 points. 1. The Targaryens, though anointed in the light of the Seven as kings, were on ancient Valyria. Thus, their traditions and customs would no longer be looked at unfavorably by the faith of the Seven anymore. And the second was the idea that because of this, they claimed kingship to all of Westeros and were to no longer be contested on grounds of their traditions and how they clashed with the faith. In essence, Jaehaerys basically told the faith of the Seven that the Targaryens were literally built different and thus they could not take them to task for things like incestuous marriages. One of the things that really established this idea in the minds of the small folk was the observation that Targaryens did not fall sick. It did not matter what kind of disease was spreading about them, the Dragon Lords of Dragonstone contracted them extremely rarely, if at all. It was said that a fire ran through the blood of the dragon that cleansed them of things that might prove the death of a lesser being. This idea was shattered in the year 60 AC when Princess Daenerys, the second-born child of Jaehaerys and his good queen Alysanne, died because of an ailment known only as the winter fever. That it caused the death of Alysanne's most beloved daughter and chosen heir was an inconsolable tragedy. But so was the shocking realization that even Targaryens were now fallible as they had incorporated themselves within the realms of men. Subsequent generations of Targaryens became more susceptible to disease and decay, and once the dragons died out, the Targaryens were truly like everyone else, prone to all the same things as they were. Princess Daenerys' death struck at the heart of Jaehaerys' doctrine of exceptionalism, but also laid the royal line exposed. Thereafter, it became easier to confirm who truly bore the blood of the dragon. This concept has been taken to its extreme in House of the Dragon, where both Daemon and Viserys came into contact with deadly diseases, but only one of them seems to succumb to his ailments. We've already spoken about Viserys' death at length, so let's talk about the one Daemon came into contact with, something we've also seen in Game of Thrones. Many people have called Grayscale George R.R. Martin's version of Leprosy, and they would not be entirely wrong in that assessment. But as with all things fantasy, George turned the dial up to 17 on that one and made it far worse than Leprosy could even dare to be. Grayscale is so contagious that the Citadel practically forbids its treatment. Wildlings hold it in such contempt that they kill the children who contract the disease instantly. And the wildling princess Val has even called Shireen Baratheon unclean in the books. Daniel Scott Smith, the man who played Kragas the crab feeder from the early episodes of House of the Dragon, has confirmed that his character suffered from grayscale, which begs the question, why is Daemon Targaryen not barking mad yet? Bear in mind, we're not talking about his brutality and sadistic games here. People who suffer from grayscale for prolonged periods of time are called stone men in the books because their skin literally turns as hard as stone and they lose their minds as the condition gets worse. And grayscale is so bad that Jorah and Jon Connington are racing against time to get their respective Targaryen rulers on the Iron Throne, whilst playing at the fool's errand of trying to conceal their grayscale from their lieges. By contrast, Daemon pulled Kragus out of the cave, where he bisected him by his grayscale-affected hand, and yet he shows no sign of turning into a Medusa-made statue or going insane. If anything, he seems to have calmed down somehow. This has left many viewers confused as to whether Daemon has grayscale or not, and the racy shots of him and Rhaenyra on the beach do not make things better, because you can clearly see Daemon has intense scarring on his right shoulder that looks like a grayscale cut. But here's where the idea of the blood of the dragon comes in. Cast your minds back to the opening of episode 3, where Daemon is riding Caraxes and taunting Kragus to face him in the field like a man. The rogue prince takes a fire arrow to his right shoulder and flies off on the bloodworm, when it becomes clear that his foe is not going to face him like a man. It is this wound that we see on his shoulder in that scene between him and Rhaenyra, not the signs of grayscale. And as for why we don't see that, well, the answer is quite simple. Daemon has the blood of the dragon flowing through him. Both Daemon and Rhaenyra are noted for their fiery nature, and it seems like this has been passed on to their children as well. But where Daemon proves that there is indeed a difference even amongst Targaryens is by not contracting grayscale at all. Prince Daemon's blood is the fiery cleanser that the Valyrians of old were known to have, the mark of a true dragon lord, whereas Viserys, who ruled over 20+ years of false peace and only rode Balerion once when the latter was dying himself, was never proven himself to be worthy of that mantle. In the scene where Viserys discusses his legacy with Lionel Strong, he claims that he wishes he had been tested like Aegon the Conqueror and Jaehaerys was. But the truth is, Viserys was not even 10 leagues below their level as a monarch and as a Targaryen. Fire and Blood makes it very clear that Viserys was more concerned with feasts and balls and more content when he was turning a blind eye to obvious troubles, things that bled into his on-screen depiction as well. But the mere fact that Viserys fell ill was actually the first sign that he wasn't even fit to be called a true Targaryen, let alone king. Because as we now know, the blood of the dragon runs thicker and cleanses everything with the purity of fire. Marvelous verdict. Because of the extremely fast-paced nature of House of the Dragon's first season, there are many things that have been left unsaid on purpose. Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik have used context and environmental storytelling to such effectiveness that if you just paid attention to the details, you would understand the bigger themes being conveyed by the show. House Targaryen, for the first 60 years of its royal existence, was unmarred by diseases that made them seem human. But once that trend began, it acted as the worst of all ill omens in King Jaehaerys' mind. And nearly 200 years later, we cannot fault him for his despair. The blood of the dragon is a real thing, and a most grievous loss for those of the Dragon Lords, who never seemed to manifest it. Sad to say, King Viserys was a part of that unfortunate class. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.
Will I be remembered as a good king, Lionel?
Your Grace?